Welcome and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, from a real crisp, clear day, winter day here in Alexandria, Virginia. I'm Riki Ellison. I'm the founder and chairman of the Missile Defense Advocacy Alliance. It's 20 years old, and with the singular mission and passion of advocating and educating for missile defense and the deployment of it, the development on it, to make our world and our nation safer. Today, we have our 47th Congressional Roundtable, as we call them, on missile defense. We have an excellent guest speakers here with us. Some of them, I think everybody's been on this a couple times already in uniform. They're out of uniform today. So we're really excited to have recently retired Lieutenant General Neil Thurgood and Rear Admiral Tom Druggan. So let's start off with how serious this subject matter is. This morning, Russia fired 76 missiles into critical infrastructures in Ukraine. Most of them cruise missiles, most of them coming from their Tu-95 planes. 40 of them targeted the capital, Kiev. This is their 9th wave of firing 70 plus missiles. Earlier this week, on Monday, China flew 18 HS bombers into the Taiwan airspace. And this follows a persistent harassment in that area, where it's highlighted on August 4th, after Nancy Pelosi visited the island, where they flew 69 planes, 49 of them into that Taiwan zone. Since August, North Korea has fired 51 missiles, most of those short range and below. And since February, Russia has fired over 5,000 missiles. This is modern warfare. This is the 21st century way to fight. And it's defined by a couple things. It's defined by persistent surveillance, where almost everything can be seen. And everything that is seen can be targeted. And everything that's targeted is done by precision weapons. The opponent is using long distances across all domains, air, land, and sea, to reduce its vulnerability to counterattack. We're seeing this, and what I just earlier said, in cruise missiles and ballistic missiles and some hypersonic missiles that are soon to come forward. So we're here today on what really is the implications of critical national infrastructure being pounded in Ukraine. Do we, the United States of America, does Europe, does Ukraine, does India, does Australia, does Japan, do they have an integrated air missile defense layered capability to defend against this modern warfare threat? That is where we're at. And we're gonna have our speakers that are, top notch. Very honored to have both of them with us. I'm going to start off with Rear Admiral Tom Druggan. He's a senior associate at CSIS. But most importantly, he comes from the last legacy item of being the program executive as a naval flag officer. We started that program with Kate Page almost 10 years ago, Tom. And Tom is now the last of any U.S. Navy admiral active to be part of that leadership on it. Within that program, you've seen one of the best in the world, or the best in the world, 360 missile defense capabilities from sea level all the way into space. Tom has certainly done some remarkable achievements, including the SM-3 Block 2A interception of an ICBM. But I think most importantly, Tom, there's a lot you've done with the radars, but really it's what's going to happen in Guam. And I think you've been a leader in creating that critical thought and insight in application of what's the best capability we can put in there for an integrated, layered missile defense capability for U.S. homeland in that situation that is in Guam. So Tom is just recently retired, and we're very excited to have him back.
Thanks,
ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks. Thank you very, very much, Ricky. Honored to be here. Obviously, I didn't do it. The Aegis BMD and Sea-Based Weapons System team down in the Missile Defense Agency is fantastic. And so that's continuing. And they are certainly producing capability and delivering it to the fleet today. And we know that. And I feel good about that. And we all should. So let's talk about long range fires here for a second as we try to understand why this is new and different, right? Before, if you go back a while, it's really, when we think of ranges, the first kind of indirect fires would have been like New York City to Newark, New Jersey, right? And then it would have been New York City down to Philadelphia, a few hundred miles or whatnot. And then it would have been New York City down to Washington, D.C., right? So those are kind of the fires that we've been used to, kind of those ranges. And yet today, now it's New York City to St. Louis, Dallas. So all of a sudden there's been this huge leap, and that creates a warfighting challenge that's now present. And certainly our potential adversaries are working on them, and they have tested their way to a capability, and there's no question about that. And what that does is that means a couple things on the ground warfare side, that now there's no traditional front with these weapons that can, not only do they have long range, you can use some of that range for maneuverability to come around behind forces. So the front is now mutable, and that changes how we need to fight on the ground warfare side. And then it also means that there's no sanctuary. The sanctuary, the logistics hubs, you used to be able to keep those outside the range of the enemy fires, so they were safe, so you could have a sanctuary for your logistics, your personnel, your staging, or your ammo, all of that. And now, from a tactical perspective, there's no sanctuary for those implements of war, right, in the tactical sense, because now the sanctuary is back at the homeland. And then you have, what that means is it takes time to get ammo and logistics and people and forces forward. And so that means that our expeditionary forces have to be more independent than ever. And as we look at the long range fires, it's going to take more than unit level tactics to defeat this kind of capability on the defensive side. The long range fires, whether it's hypersonic or ballistic missile threat or long range cruise missiles, those do change how we're going to have to adapt and fight both ground warfare and also naval warfare, particularly in the Western Pacific. So that kind of sets the stage of, what do we do about it, right? Now, these are tough challenges. They're not impossible. And against many of them, we have adequate and effective defenses. It's particularly true down in the kind of the naval cruise missile range and then the ballistic missile side of the house. Hypersonics being the newcomer. We do need to tweak our current radar systems to make sure that we can detect and track those threats. And then very important in this range, given just the vast area that we're talking about, is to not only get track custody of a threat, but to then keep it and be able to hand it off. So interoperability and integration now become an imperative. They don't enhance the force. They're now necessary for the survival of the force. So that's going to be a very important consideration wherever you are. So we're going to have to rely more and more, given this kind of threats, on a few things, right? How do you survive this kind of threat? One is you can certainly avoid the strikes through maneuver, by denying the enemy their surveillance, their scouting, and that's certainly a fruitful path. You always have to be cautious that you don't believe that you've denied all of their scouting capability. And there might be some residual capability that may be enough, right? You also have to deny them by deception. Operational deception is going to be a new old art form. We used to be very good at it with operational deception, It's got to become part of our routine, certainly on the naval warfare side of the house. And the reason for that is these kinds of long range missiles, they are expensive. And in the naval warfare sense, they all have to have a seeker to find their target at sea. So that makes them also more expensive. As a result, there'll be many of them, but there will not be tens of thousands of them. And so what that means is that gives us options on how do you attrite the stockpile of the enemy while preserving your forces. It does open the door to something that we really haven't had to deal with in a long time in naval warfare, which is the fact that we're going to have force on force level attrition as we have a conflict. And as we go into how to deal with battle damage and survivability of not individual ships and platforms and things like that, but of the force to maintain a fighting force, that'll be absolutely critical. Past is prologue here to some extent. We did many of these things in World War II. We didn't have a need for many of them, and they revived during the Cold War to some extent, but now it really becomes a priority on how to address this kind of long-range fires threat. Now, every now and then you do have to have a forward logistics hub or staging area, and Guam is one of those for the United States of America, not to mention that it's a U.S. territory, right, with over 100,000 U.S. citizens on the island. So at that point, you have some different choices, right? But clearly, we have to defend Guam, and to defend it effectively, we're going to have to invest in that. So we'll see where the budget goes this year. I personally think that that's an important, has critical infrastructure there, and having the capability to defend against cruise missiles, hypersonic missiles, and ballistic missile threats will be important to the viability of Guam as a staging area in the future. And if nothing else, you have to have the level of capacity there to at least buy time. And the defense of Guam has, I think, personally, a dual purpose. One is to deny any attack from North Korea. But the other is also to deter any Chinese Communist Party activity against Guam. And so we raised the threshold to ensure that that happens. So there's a couple of groups for you out of the gate.
So Tom, you well articulated the defense of the carrier group and the Navy capabilities, and I think you're ahead of the game and the world on that ability to do long distance fires defense for your fleet. But now putting that application on ground like you're doing in Guam, is there applications for that to go on somewhere else besides an island, like the United States homeland, like Europe? And B, your command and control is so good that we're using it right now on land for that purpose. So I'm asking, and I think we have a struggle with roles and responsibilities of Navy versus the other services for that application of what you're doing. Can you just elaborate a little bit on your C2 system and land application of the Navy defensive capability?
Happy to. So first, for strike groups at sea, these are carrier strike groups at sea, as well as expeditionary strike groups at sea. Typically, there's a number of Aegis ships. So the Aegis ships provide long-range surveillance and the ability to act on that data. So long-range surveillance as well as long-range fire control for us, an assortment, frankly, of weapons that come out of the vertical.
And there's no gap there. When you've got capability today.
We have excellent capability today for cruise missile defense, some hypersonic missile defense, and for ballistic missile defense. On the hypersonic piece, there's some additional kinetic kill weapons company, the Glide Phase Interceptor out of the Missile Defense Agency is one of those. And then, of course, right now you're seeing certainly proposed considerable investment in things like directed energy to include lasers, as well as a cyber capability to do left to launch or add to our ability to do operational deception or decoy kind of things. So there is an excellent capability there. It is important to note that it's 360 degrees and from the horizon all the way up to the zenith. Okay. So that gives you excellent surveillance, particularly when you have several, right? And what's important about the naval warfare, many people are familiar with the joint system, the Link 16, that provides the ability for the joint force to share data. Within the Navy, we have an additional system that allows us to trade fire control data on a local level. And what's important about that is that means that if I don't have an optimal sensor geometry, but you do, then I can use your fire I can use your fire control data for my missile. And so that gives you a level of resiliency and robustness for the defense of the strike group at sea. And the Aegis ships provide not just, obviously they're defending themselves. That's not their most important job, right? It's a critical job, but the reason we have Aegis ships is to provide area defense, which will include aircraft carriers, high value units, things like that. Now we've gotten to the point where Aegis is providing a force level defense where we can shoot smart missiles over the horizon using third party targeting. And we're even now being able to defend our forces, friends and allies against very long range ballistic threats. And so the SM-3 Block 2A gives us that long range capability with an additional layer with the SM-3 Block 1B. So, in the Navy, we always believe in layered defense. And it's a critical aspect of naval warfare to be able to trade an enemy raid, a big raid over time and battle space, and be able to trade it so that the force can survive. Multiple ships are important so that they can leverage each other's weapons and sensors for defense of the force. We have a new system coming online with DDG-51. So Arleigh class, amazing shipbuilding program. We're now doing the Flight 3 upgrade. We had the original Flight 1s, we had a Flight 2, we had a Flight 2A configuration, and now we have Flight 3. Flight 3 will bring with the Aegis baseline 10 with the SPY-6 air and missile defense radar. This will give us the option on the naval warfare side of the house to enhance and advance our CONOPS by using the capabilities of that radar in its C2 suite. So that's just going to make it better.
Yeah.
And so but those will come as onesie twosies here in the 2020 as a shipbuilding program for the Flight 3 ramps up. Yeah. The final piece is space. So very important already that the Navy has an excellent relationship with Space Force. The survival and the ability for the Navy to project power is enhanced by our space capability. Super important. Not more importantly, but also importantly is we provide sensor data to the Space Force. So that can become, as a forward stage force, forward operating force, we can provide, some pretty exquisite cueing to the Space Force for threats that are regional.
So you're so good. I mean, you're the best in the world at this ability to defend long distance fires, and give you a lot of credit for the Japanese being able to do that, those multiple shoot downs with their capabilities.
Historic
on that.
Yeah, absolutely historic. We'll talk about that.
But you're so good now that our land components, like Guam, want your ships to be stationed to defend Guam right now, to help the defense of Guam. So my question is, transferring that capability over to land, which I think we're trying to do some of it into Guam, is that going to be?
Well, we're going to see the answer here with the 2023 budget, right? What the investments are and what part of the military is doing what. So as we know from the NDAA, there's kind of the Army's been assigned the cruise missile defense mission for Guam as a plan. Obviously, the appropriations has their part that they need to do. And the Navy, not the Navy, but the Missile Defense Agency has been assigned the portion of the mission that is hypersonic missile defense and ballistic missile defense. And so the Missile Defense Agency has been working on an architecture for that. But at the end of the day, you not only need the authorization, you need the appropriations to be able to move that football down the field.
Okay. All right, that's good. Good stuff. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty...
What we do know is Aegis is effective.
Yeah. No, you got it.
It's effective for hypersonic missile defense and ballistic missile defense, and it's affordable because we already have a large installed base of these systems. So it's a marginal cost to add.
And your baseline 10 engaged on remote launch. I mean, that's just the network is just.
That's right. So the Navy is now fighting at the network level, like never before. We're doing it with air-to-air missiles. We're doing it with sea strike missiles. We're doing it with ballistic missiles. And we will certainly do it with hypersonic defenses as we move forward into the glide phase interceptor.
Those are big boots to fill there, Neil, coming at you now with how great the Navy has done with this mission and application of it and real ahead of the threat, been driven on this since the early.
I don't know, but congratulations to the Army for this past weekend with their win. Well deserved.
All right, our next speaker is one of the best, I think, in the game. He is just retired from being the director for rapid acquisition for hypersonics directed energy and space. He has also been the test director for the Missile Defense Agency. He is one of the most innovative, strong, out front leaders of our Army. There are going to be some great legacies coming from his leadership in directed energy, I think, with the 150 or the 350K coming out of there. Your MRC capabilities is going to be awesome. He's a big thinker and he's a leader in that. He's been in the Army since '83. I want to give him a little shout out for his University of Utah education and the running Utes, on top of the compliment that Tom just gave you for that game last weekend. So, ladies and gentlemen, Neil Thurgood.
Hey, thanks, Ricky. You guys hear and see me okay?
Yep.
All right, super. Well, listen, it's great to be here today. Tom, it's super great to see you. And for those that didn't know, congratulations to Tom for his first grandbaby. So that's super great. And welcome to the world of grandpas. It's super fun. It is great to be here. And Ricky, we appreciate your leadership in putting this forum together, right? To start the discussion and to inform the discussion. We got some hard decisions in front of our nation as we move forward. And this is a key part of getting that conversation going. And I'll pile on with some of the things that Tom said. Tom is a good friend. We were together in MDA along with Vice Admiral Wolf. And I will tell you the things we did together and learned together was super impressive. You mentioned the Japan. I remember sitting in Pearl Harbor on an Aegis cruiser, getting ready to do a shot. And I remember standing there on that Japanese ship in Pearl Harbor going, if our grandparents could see us now. really quite the great work that Tom, you and your team have done, and the MDA team. Let me pile on a couple of thoughts here. Number one, we do live in interesting times, and at the time when our technology is actually outpacing our policy. The time when we're trying to do things at pace with our adversaries, and some of it's catch up, some of it's leading, and there's a mix in between there where we are. But in all cases, we are in a place in history where our policies, though made soundly and based on history, probably need to be adjusted as we're moving forward. And there need to be adjusted because our adversaries, our peer competitors that Tom talked about, they have a different value base, they have a different policy base, and they have a different set of rules at which they're going to fight. And we have to adjust and understand that. And in doing that adjustment in our policies, we've got to make sure that we keep the moral high ground. And how do we do that? How do we put policies in place that keep the moral high ground for our nation and for the global community? How do we do that and maintain our freedom of action, both economically, diplomatically, and of course in the military? And then how do we institute a positive global change in this modern warfare that Ricky, that you started the conversation with? And I think all those things are things we have to address as we move forward. For those that have served in uniform or studied warfare in any fashion at any level, you know that you have to do things in multiple ways, right? Tom used the word layered defense. As a ground soldier, layered defense is how we survive. Kill things far away as you can and keep killing them until they're close to you. And attrit the enemy's ability to bring harm to our forces. So how do we do that? It's not complicated. Multiple dilemmas for the enemy, multiple timelines of dilemmas, and multiple avenues of advance for the dilemmas. Think about how we do that in missile defense and how we do that with offensive structures and missiles. And I get asked the question all the time, well, do we actually need a sea capability, a land capability, and an air capability? And my answer is absolutely yes in all three, both in the offense and in the defense. Because there is no perfect weapon for any perfect day. And so we have to be able to assume that the enemy's going to get a vote, and we have to have multiple ways to solve the problem. When you talk about long distance fires, traditionally for the Army, and I'll say since when Tom and I were lieutenants, you know, in the Army, we had the Persian missile systems, and we backed away from those systems out of the Army. Those were long shooters. And now with the start of offensive hypersonic weapons, which was a responsibility that we had in our organization to begin for the Army, joining with the Navy, and then the mid-range capability for the Army, brings the Army back into strategic fires. In the realization of that entrance back into that domain, I'm going to reiterate something that Tom said. We no longer can fight as individual services. We must fight both vertically integrated and horizontally integrated, right? So the command and control structures that we have, that we've been fighting with as independent services, are no longer sufficient. We must change. If you look at the Army and the hypersonics, we adopted the Navy system. We didn't make our own, we adopted the Navy system. If you look at the Army and the mid-range capability, we adopted the Navy system. We have to get beyond traditional parochial approaches if you want to be an integrated air and missile defense, meaning the ability to do offensive and defensive fire simultaneously on the battlefield. Because as you articulated, Ricky, that is the future. It's no longer a defense, it's no longer an offense, there's no longer a forward line of troops, as Tom indicated. The battle space is everywhere. And because the battle space is everywhere, you need integrated offensive, defensive fire simultaneously. Tom mentioned third party command and control. And I'm going to expand that a little bit, Tom, and you can pile on if you choose to. It's not just third party within our services, it's third party with our allied and partner nations. We have got to adjust our policies and our processes, particularly in foreign military sales, if we want to take advantage of the global strength, not just the U.S. strength. And I think anybody would tell you that the future fight is not a U.S. only fight. And we see that happening right now in real time in Eastern Europe. The global community contributing to that. And so if you combine that interoperability, which is an imperative, and I agree with Tom, it's not just between us that are wearing a U.S. flag on our shoulder, it's between us and our allied and partner nations. And we've really got to open the aperture of that conversation if we want to move at pace. And then the last thing I'll just mention, which I think is critically important to all of this, is Tom did this one as a PEO. We tried to do it in the RCCTO. We have got to approach the acquisition of material differently. And we tried really hard in the RCCTO to show the Department of Defense a new way to think about doing business. We have to stop waiting to be perfect. I tell you, our sailors, our soldiers, our Marines, our Space Force, our airmen, they are smart. They can adjust, they can adapt. We can get them equipment and they'll show us how to use it better and faster than we ever thought possible. And so we've got to adjust the way we do business as we look at this nation state war. And then the last thing I'll say, and Ricky, I think you mentioned this, in modern warfare, if you believe that persistence overhead surveillance is there, if you can do that, you can target, right? If you can be seen, you can be targeted. If you can be targeted, you're probably not going to get a second shot. That's modern warfare. The amount of destruction that's going to happen in modern warfare, nation state on nation state, is what we saw in World War II. That's where the future is. And we got to be prepared for that. We've got to work past our policy problems. We've got to work at integrated solutions. I got to be able to call the Navy and go, I need you to shoot this missile. You can't see it yet, but it's coming. Get ready. And they got to be able to do the same thing for me. They got to be able to call the combatant commander in Indo-PACOM's got to be able to call an Army unit and say, put a hypersonic weapon there. We need a target there. We need it right now. Those are new things we haven't done that we have to practice both procedure and policy to make happen. And I'll pause there, Ricky.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Two questions. One is, how soon can, well, this integrated C2 where you can play with everybody, with our services and with the allies, is that more important than getting capacity in to be able to do that first? And when is that going to come? And the second question is there is capability today, but it's expensive shot per kill capability. When is our cheaper revolutionary DE jamming, all that stuff coming? How long do we have to wait? It seems like it never comes. We've been asking for this for quite some time. So there is a window here, and you're seeing Indo-PACOM, you're seeing EUCOM demand capabilities, and then DoD doesn't want to invest too much because they're investing in the bigger future capabilities. I mean, you're right in the middle of that. Those are the two things I would like you to.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Those are both great questions. On the first one, if you can use more people's assets, you automatically increase capacity and capability at no cost. Right. So if I can command and control more and get more integrated into it for missiles that already exist, then my marginal cost is small. And so I would think that the C2 piece with our allied and partner nations and across the services, as Tom was talking about, is critical for us. It automatically increases our capacity and our capability.
What's the biggest challenge for not doing that? Why aren't we able to do that quicker?
Yeah, and I tell you, it's a couple. Tom, you might want to pile on here. I'll give you a couple.
Yeah, I got a couple comments.
Thoughts. So the first thought is, we didn't think that way in the Cold War. We didn't think as we're talking today, right? It's easy to look back and go, well, why didn't we? I don't know why. We've matured in our thought processes, so we didn't design the weapon systems to do that. The Patriot weapon system in the Army was designed to use a standalone weapon system. We're not there anymore. Now we've got to put it in a network environment. We've got to put it in what we call in the Army the Integrated Air and Missile Defense Battle Command System. That's got to be able to talk to the Navy system. And so what was started as weapon systems to solve particular problems now have been expanded to be in a network environment, right? And so we have to do that. We just didn't think that way when we're doing the build up in the Cold War. The second part of that is the way we build weapon systems today, and I'll just say modular, is significantly different than we built them parochially as individual weapon systems. So their ability to network is now different than how we originally constructed them. And so those two things allow you to think differently about the application of capability, not in a standalone piece. And Tom, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's really important here that we spend a couple minutes talking about the difference between a command and control network and interoperability and fighting at the network level with the fire control capability. So one is a common operating picture. The command and control is a common operating picture, situational awareness. It's actionable to some extent, but falls short of what you need for weapons control. And it falls short because either the data is late, the data is intermittent, and even a couple seconds is intermittent when it comes to weapon control, right? It's just time. It's just time late, right? So it's late, it's not accurate enough, or the updates aren't close enough together, right? So that kind of detail, very, very important for the commander to have that information for situational awareness, to prepare for action. There's a different network by which we can trade data and I can shoot off your sensor data or Neil's sensor data. That's a different, because that's a real-time problem. And that means I have to have very accurate, very quick data. And so the command network for common operating picture and situational awareness, much more achievable and quickly, right? And actually we're there in a number of different areas. C2BMC is a good example.
Is that with the allies too, or just within our services?
Well, so it's actually expanded to with our allies. So a good example is both RIMPAC, which is a huge naval expert. I'll talk about Navy because that's my domain. RIMPAC, all the Rim of the Pacific nations, many of them come to that, and we work on interoperability. So my experience there is a few years old. More recent though, with the number of NATO countries, and it's actually bigger than NATO. It's the Maritime Theater Missile Defense Forum. They get together every 2 years, and there's an exercise that's called Formidable Shield.
Mhm.
This is run at the range off Hebrides, Scotland, as well as there's an associated range off Norway. And so during that, in the beginning, it would take days and days and days just to get the network, the C2 network up, stable, reliable. Because we worked with the Allies every other year for a number of years now, literally the navies come together, and we're talking 10 navies, 16, 18 ships come together, and within a couple hours, they have an effective and reliable network. So that's what's important about working with allies over time, and touch points and periodic touch points and reoccurring periodic touch points become really important, so that the capability is not episodic, right? It's actually an enduring capability over time. So if push comes to shove and we need to come together as an allied force, or even an allied force, then we can share that command and control piece. That gives you effective command and control, very helpful, right? Because then you can get command direction, you have mission command, you can get into execution very quickly. Fire control is just harder. It's just fundamentally harder. The biggest difference is system to system engineering is required to connect the fire control dots, right? Otherwise you miss. And missing is not allowed. I mean, we have limited stockpiles no matter where you are. Certainly in the tactical sense, you have what you have with you. And every round and every missile that you shoot's got to be effective. And so having knowing that if I have a fire control network, that it supports my fire control, that gives me the confidence to shoot off third-party data. Now, so what are some examples there? So we have Aegis to Aegis. We've been doing that for a couple decades, right? We've added now land-based TPY-2 data supporting Aegis ships at sea for the Ballistic Missile Defense Agency. That's called Engage on Remote Capability. So that's another one. We've done some demonstrations with PAC-3 into Aegis. That can be done. The fundamental engineering has been done. It's just, and the requirements are there. It's a matter of turning that on and actually doing the coding. And we could have, and what that does is that allows it allows the PAC-3 to use the Aegis radar data, right? Pretty good, right? We also have the THAAD to Patriot.
The FAT-C2?
Yeah, the THAAD controlling, right? So the THAAD Patriot integration. So you're seeing it happen in different areas.
And that's going to come in Guam too. I would
I
assume.
think you'll see a number of those systems that can combine.
Is there a country that we're doing this with yet that we can share fire control like this? Or is this is just still within our own services to be able to?
Well, right now it's a US capability, but I would say, I'd have to get into the details of each of the FMS cases. Certainly, we've sold THAAD, which has the TPY-2 radar.
Yeah, so
We've sold Aegis. We could certainly do fire control exchanges with the Japanese, which we have demonstrated, and that should be true for the South Koreans and the other Aegis navies in the world.
Yeah, I think you see that same true for the ground side, right? So whether I'm interoperating a Patriot or THAAD with a ship or an aircraft or an allied nation, I think what you're pulling at, Ricky, is, and I think Tom is getting to this point, is it's not global and universal, right? That's where we have to get to. It's not global and universal right now. We can do it when we need to. We know how to do it, but we've got to get it global and universal.
Not like NATO or GCC or we're not there because we have so many different systems.
Well, I think we
share, like he said, system engineering across the.
I think we are at the command and control. The fire control level is just a heavier lift, right? And it's not easy. Don't ever think it's easy.
Would that be eliminating or just going with US systems or not the Russian systems that some of our Eastern European allies have to make this easier, or?
So somebody has to have the will and frankly the resources to go after something like that in particular, and it's going to have to be it's going to be driven by their national interests, right?
Yeah.
And the policy has to support it on both sides of the government.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. The policy has to support both sides, and I think we have a bunch of work to there.
Frankly, I think we have enough work to do with our own systems.
Yeah.
I think the plate is full right now. And so I think that's probably okay.
Yeah, but I'm just
Yeah.
looking at what's going on in the world and the capacity, lack of capacity issues right now. Like you guys said, the best is to be able to connect everybody to play together so you can have much more capacity very easily than having to go out and produce a bunch more stuff.
Yeah, here's the other piece of this that I think we got to make sure we bring into the conversation. And that is, in long range fires or long range defensive of our adversaries' long range fires, it's mostly shot from a protected sanctuary position inside a nation state, right? And so how do we influence that fight, right? In other words, the defense of a long range fires coming our direction is probably not going to happen at the launch pad. It's probably going to happen somewhere after the launch pad. Now, we'd like to change that. You asked about directed energy and those systems. And we have, we have on the battle space today, lower powered high energy laser systems. We've got to ramp that up. The Army is in my opinion, leading that charge with their lower kilowatts that are in the fight today, and then the ones we just fielded actually this month at Fort Sill. High energy lasers are no longer a thing that is 5 years out, from my opinion. Do we have it exactly perfect? Absolutely not. We do not. But we have it at a point where it's safe enough for a soldier can use it, and we can develop it better.
I think an important aspect here, both for naval and ground warfare, is even the low power lasers and some of the other non-kinetic techniques to take on the drones. The drones are coming. We know that, right? We're seeing it now. There's no reason any thinking adversary wouldn't expand their ability for drone warfare. Will be a very not difficult. It's going to be a major challenge, and it's going to be a present threat, certainly in ground warfare. For naval warfare, you have to remember we're 10s, 20s, hundreds of miles off the coast.
Yeah.
So drone warfare takes on a little bit of a different flavor because you have to be longer range with endurance, or there has to be a host platform nearby. So that gives naval warfare a few different options. But low power lasers and low power non-kinetic energy weapons or non-kinetic weapons can really help in mitigate the drone threat.
Okay, let's get to our next speaker because time's running fast. Unless you want something real quick, Leo?
I was just going to say, again, directed energy, I said this all the time. It's not the placebo of life. It's one of many tools in the quiver. It's not the tool. I don't believe there is the tool. I think you have to have multiple ways to defend and multiple ways to attack.
Okay, so talking about policy, we've got Mark here who spent a lot of time under Senator McCain at the CSIS committee doing policy. Mark's really well-rounded, the deputy commander of EUCOM Ops, and he was the director of Indo-PACOM Ops or PACOM Ops. He's an advisor to us, and he's a great mind behind this. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Montgomery.
Hey, thanks, Ricky. Good to be here. Two smart guys ahead of me. Look, I'll just pick up on 3 points. One is we absolutely have to press with offensive strike from all three areas, air, naval, and ground. But I want to be clear, the air one's the only one that's safe. If you're a ground shooter, an Army Marine Corps ground shooter inside the first island chain, doing long range strike into China, or in Europe doing strike into Russia, or you're a ship out at sea, you're going to be targeted, particularly in the Asia Pacific one. I think China has got the ability to target in the weapons. So we'll talk a little bit about the missile defense that's going to require in a second. But the reason it's important is the number one driver of casualties in a major Asia Pacific dust up, whether it's over Taiwan or the East China Sea, is your ability to strike at range. The number of long-range strike weapons is in a seesaw, and the other side is the number of U.S. or allied casualties. If we have a lot of long-range strike weapons, we're going to have a low number of casualties. Most of the war games I've seen have done unclassified, talking about 5,000 or 7,000 casualties. But if you have to close the enemy because the adversary ran out of long-range strike, whether it was air, ground, or naval, your casualty rate goes up to 20 to 25,000. That starts to become the the gulp that doesn't quite get through the throat of the National Security Council and the president when they're making decisions. So we have to drive down the casualty rate. The way you drive down the casualty rate is you increase your long-range strike. Now, that leads to the question we're talking about today. How do you make that long-range strike survivable? Tom, at the very beginning, mentioned, cruise missile defense, ballistic missile defense, hypersonic defense. And I just got three quick thoughts. The first is, in the ballistic and some of the cruise, it's a capacity issue. We have capabilities. It's just raw numbers. And China, unfortunately, can build their attack weapon now currently at an ROI, return on investment cost, that drives up our spending on ballistic missile defense, which is why it's such a great answer to hear from to hear the discussion of laser and other kind of low unit cost rounds. So from my perspective, that's important. So the next is the idea. So first you have the capacity. The second is there is a capability problem in cruise missile defense. And I've hammered this home. Neil and Tom are probably more genteel and nice than I am, but the Army has got a significant problem with with low-cost cruise missile defense. I mean, when I heard that we're going to pass Patriots to Ukraine, I just fell on my seat. I'm like, $4.2 million a round. I mean, we're going to burn through that 18 or $20 billion really darn quick if we do that. But in addition, even for the United States, it's not a cost-effective round against low altitude cruise, conventional, sub-Mach, particularly cruise missiles. We need a system there, whether it's NASAMS, which we've been recommending for years, and apparently it's good enough for pretty much all our allies and the National Guard, but not for the rest of us, the Joint Force. That's an answer. If it's IFPC and somehow it stops being 2 years from being 2 years away, that'd be fantastic. Okay, that leads to the third problem. The third problem is hypersonics. And here we do have a problem. We look at our adversary and we go, they're China and Russia, they're doing pretty good, but we're catching up in the offense, we might even be ahead. That's fantastic. The problem, though, when you're dealing with a near peer adversary who's an authoritarian regime that has first mover status, is you don't have to be as good as it's not your offense that has to be as good as his offense. It's your defense that has to be as good as offense, so that he doesn't have the ability to strike you at will at the start of a crisis and take you out of the game. And that's where I'm worried. I'm worried because if you look at the amount of money being spent on the offense, I'm guessing, it's hard to see with black programs and everything, but I'm guessing, $4 billion, $5 billion a year on hypersonic offense. I think I'm generous if I say that hypersonic defense is $450 million a year. That 10-to-1 differential is going to kick our butt in the future. We have got to get this moved up. I'm also, we have Glide Phase Interceptor, BMD, and we have, I think, Glide Breaker at DARPA. Got a couple programs going. That's fantastic. But if one of them were to be moved on from, canceled, moved on from, then even that 10% investment versus the offense would be washed off the table. So I'm really worried that we're not making these investments. So, we really have to focus the Missile Defense Agency on answering this technological challenge about hitting a hypersonic weapon with a weapon, tracking it, getting a fire control solution, and hitting it. So to me, summing up 3 issues: 1, capacity overall; 2, some capability in the ground-based cruise missile defense, eminently solvable. Lithuania's figured it out. I think the United States can figure it out. And then 3, the capability issue on hypersonic defense. Look, I think we still have 5 or 6 years before this really hits us in the teeth, but we better be chugging along in that hypersonic defense so that we don't create a condition where one side can do escalation management and the other can't. Riki, back over to you.
Okay, I'm going to pass it over to you, Tom. You want to address?
No, just in your calculations, Mark, one of the things, would you add to that, programs like active EA? Obviously, the Navy has Seaway Block 3, also known as Slick 32, Victor 7, that's going out on ships, which will have, denying of the sequel, which is kind of a unique Navy, where every enemy missile system that's targeting a ship has to have in-game guidance in order to hit that ship. And consequently, that's something that can be exploited either through the operational deception, the counter targeting, decoys, and active EA. Do those kinds of programs or thoughts help, or they're already in your logic train here and insufficient?
So here's what I'd say is that they're not in the 450 million category. You're right. If you contribute and there's a percentage, you have to give some kind of percentage that's about the hypersonic, but we'll just say all of it for a minute. The problem is that leaves you in the same problem in cruise missile defense, which is, I love the Navy. I think the Navy's critical to winning the fight, but the Navy's not the only element to win this fight. We have to keep our ground forces safe. And the same mathematics doesn't apply because ground forces, move a little. And I think they tend to distribute. They like to. I mean, we've seen the defense of Guam get kind of kerfuffled by that. But, and the problem with that is those jammers, decay in their coverage as range expands on the defense, what we would call traditionally missile defense, the defended area, is of a fixed site. So I think we really do need to figure out, a kinetic solution as well. It does not have to be, it may eventually not be a missile. It may be some other form of energy or something, but I think those only count a little bit. And I would say the same thing, like when I think about defending against weaving cruise missiles, when you and I commanded destroyers, did we say to ourselves, it's okay, my standard missile system's down, I got chaff. Neither one of us would have accepted that answer from our fire control officer. So no. I think probably for the purpose of this question, I'd say useful, but not decisive.
Yeah, I think your observation on the Army is accurate, right? For 20 years in the global war on terror, we bought some of that bill with bringing our air defense forces down, including our material solutions to support the air defense force. I think under Secretary McCarthy, General McConville, that's been a realization. I think they see that point, and I can tell you that the Army's in the process of re-strengthening. I don't want to say rebuilding, but re-strengthening, thickening both the material solutions and the actual manpower to do that structure. One of the realizations, and the combination of the realization is that, and somebody's talked about counter UAS. It applies with that same construct. You can't build enough air defenders to counter all the counter UASs, right? Everybody's got to have that particular mission set, particularly for Group 1, 2s, and 3s. But in the air defense world, we got to kill cruise missiles, right? Again, you got to be able to kill them with NASAMs. You got to be able to kill them with other weapon systems. You got to be able to kill them with directed energy, both high energy lasers and high power microwaves. And the 300 kilowatt system is designed to do that, help with that mission set. But I think that your point is valid in that we don't have enough now, and I think the Army is rebuilding that structure now.
And one thing I'd say, I agree. And historically, I'm not kind to IFPC or IBCS. I think I alter what I say now and say, I think IFPC has value if it was standalone. I mean, do I believe in AIM-9X's Sentinel radar generally? I believe those two things work just fine. And I believe in IBCS alone, because I think IBCS is like a fancy version of CEC, or my Air Force general friends like to call it KEC, and you have to explain to them, that's a CEC system. That's a CE system. For 25 years, you've demeaned and kicked to the curb, and now realize, hey, that was probably the answer 25 years ago. But it's putting them together that makes me nervous. If IFPC's delivery gets tied to an IBCS fire control solution, my son's a midshipman now. He'll be a lieutenant commander by the time an IFPC is out in numbers, right? So what I'd really love to do is see the Army say, look, we're going to get ourselves. It doesn't have to be standalone. It can be Link 6. We know how to do Link 16 with the best of them. It can be a AIM-9X based, Sentinel based, Link 16 system. That's going to whack a lot of low altitude cruise missiles just fine, and make it so that when you have a whammy dime, you can break out the SM-6 from a shore-based VLS, or you can use a Patriot. If you've got a Patriot nearby. That's what I think we got to get to. But I'm afraid the Army is going to try so hard to have the integrated solutions that we're going to wait a long time on IFPC, maybe 2030, 2022.
Yeah, so I think that the MRC program, the mid-range capability, where we now have land-based Tomahawks and SM-6s, will help that piece as we just fielded that first battery this month, actually. You know, that you bring up a good point, Mark, and I was going to mention earlier, I'll just reiterate it now. One of the differences between an air surface or a Navy surface is we sometimes, while we focus on China and Russia, we forget about our fourth priority, right? Somebody said call it the fifth priority, our national defense strategy, which is the violent extreme organizations are still out there. We still are deployed in independent battle positions around the world. Some of our battle positions will never be integrated. So I think to your point, we've got to be able to not only shoot alone, but we've got to be able to shoot integrated. And I think as we go through for the Army FATADS and FADC2, which is offensive defensive fires, the plan is to bring those into IBCS, not slow down to IBCS, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's the right word or not to use, but hopefully that makes sense.
You know, and I'll add one other thing, Ricky. I just finished kind of pouring through the NDAA, and look, it is a tremendous bill. I mean, I don't want to get into the whole Taiwan argument here, but I'll just tell you, it's the most significant legislation about Taiwan since the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979. It will fundamentally change our ability to fight and win in the Pacific. It may not do it. The appropriations is in 6 days, so I'm not sure it's going to kick the crap out of this appropriations, but a year from now, it'll be good, and 2 years from now, it'll be great. 3 years from now, it'll be the absolute game changer. All right. But what else is in there, thank you to Vladimir Putin, is multi-year purchasing authorities. And after Javelin, Sting, everyone's looking at getting all excited. Then there's the LRASMs and the naval strike missiles for Chinese naval campaign. You're all excited. And then there's the air defense one. There is permission to do long range, to do multi-year contracting for up to 15,000 air defense missiles between Patriot, AIM-9X, AMRAAM. I mean, it makes you giddy, you know, and there's you know, real opportunity in my mind, and there's SM-6 as well in there as well for long range extra production. And there's defense industrial base investments in the SM-6 factory complex. In other words, the U.S. government's going to put skin in the game to help, you know, Raytheon get to the next level, you know, put their own skin in the game and increase production levels. I know for the LRASM, the amount of money should take it from 80 to 250-ish. So it's a tripling. I'm not sure what happened with SM-6, but we're changing the kind of like the maximum, you know, numerator that you can have in your production. These are big deals, you know, for us. And I just want to say that the Congress delivered on this, and they delivered for air defense. And I think you may have mentioned already, but they also said, they also directed the Department of Defense to procure up to 3 vertical launch systems for the defense of Guam, which just made me giddy because, you know, you and I pushed that hard over the last 3 years. And Tom Druggan, because I was on active duty, certainly didn't tell us that it was a good idea.
Well, if you just want something you can buy today, right now, then it's an excellent solution. And, you know, probably the right solution is having the VLS there to provide that ready defensive response and some other mobile assets to add resiliency and also to induce some level of uncertainty in the enemy's calculus.
Neil, let's get right to the point. What is the Army solution right now? I mean, you're seeing we're going to get all these interceptors. What are the launchers? What are the systems? What are we doing? Are we going to make NASAMS program record? Are we going to make CRAM program record? As if they can be pushed up? What can you do now to increase your capacity in the Army cruise missile defense system specifically?
Yeah, so I think it's 2 parts, right? For the IFPC program, there's 2 parts to that, IFPC kinetic and IFPC high energy laser. Those have the priority for the Army. They're going to go forward, and you'll see that in the budget. And if you just went through the NDA, you saw that. So that'll come through, and we'll see what, you know, what Congress does at the end of the day, which will drive that. You'll see the continued allied and partner nation fielding of Patriots, along with our own Patriots. I agree with, I think, everybody in the world that we don't have enough Patriots. And so you've got to get the capacity of our industrial base to build those as we go forward. And so those are the, and then I'll just add the MRC program, the mid-range capability, where you have SM-6s, right? So now you have a weapon system on the rails for the Army, first one ever, that is both offensive, defensive on the rails. And Tom's an expert at SM-6 and Tomahawks and all those kind of things. So now you have the ability to reach out further at a the reason I had SM6, that program is it goes at hypersonic speeds. So the next block upgrades for those weapon systems are critical for us. But that's where the Army's headed. The Army is going to have to learn how to do what we were really good at in the Cold War, and we're trying to relearn that capability for air defense at our battle space ranges.
Will you expand the C2 THAAD systems with Patriot launchers to just multiply that without using the Patriot? This is kind of stuff that I think you're doing a little bit in Korea, but you're not doing it anywhere else because you're waiting on IBCS and everything else. And you said that, right? You're not going to wait anymore. You're gonna go forward.
You got to get the systems out there that you can right now. I think that's Mark's point, right? We don't have enough. We've got to get out there. And I think to capitalize on Tom's point is we have lots of good examples where those systems are talking in particular situations, right? What we have to push to, I think, as a nation and as services is global application of what we could do in small numbers now.
Mark, are there any things that we should answer? Any questions that come up, or do you want to?
So first we hammered the questions pretty well. It's funny, in the last like 5 minutes that the questions that came in were about strategic deterrence and the hypersonics.
Can I comment on that real quick? Just when we talk about hypersonics, so important that whoever's communicating establish what you're talking about. Are you talking about conventionally armed hypersonic threats in a regional context? Are you talking about conventionally armed hypersonic threats against the homeland? Or are you talking about nuclear armed hypersonic threats anywhere? All right, those are three different discussions, believe it or not, in terms of U.S. policy.
And is U.S. policy defending two of those three?
No. It's just our response, our policy response is different in each one of those cases.
And it's going to make it hard because I got to tell you, this is like, I don't want to get too much into nuclear politics here, but one of the problems I always had with like the low yield Trident, the idea we dial it back, to a Hiroshima from whatever it was, and it launches. The Russians don't have the ability to say, oh, that must be a low yield Trident coming at us. We're not going to overreact to this. They're going to see it like, hey, an SLBM was just launched from a submarine where we had no idea where it was. We better take some action. You might trip a few wires there. We're going to have the same issue going on with hypersonics now. When on the ones that, particularly ones against the homeland, where you say, Tom says there's one that's conventional weapon and one that's a nuclear weapon. Let me just tell you, the two of them can look just alike. If you want proof of it, ask the Ukrainians. They've been picking up warhead casings that were clearly previously held nuclear warheads and the Russians have removed the nuclear warheads to use them as conventional cruise missiles or ballistic, short-range ballistic missiles. So, back to that hypersonic case, one gets launched at you, it's traveling at Mach 8, it's going 4,000 miles to cut across Alaska. Is it conventional? Is it nuclear? If it's nuclear, you probably have you're tripping a whole different set of doctrine internally. And I think we in the Russians/Soviets could talk our way through that. We had arms control discussions. We think they were painful, but productive. I think it's a good way to look at it. With the Chinese, we don't have any of this. The Chinese have for years commingled their nuclear and conventional C2, which scares the hell out of us. We in the Soviet/Russians never did that. That way, if you're attacking our conventional C2, it's normal game. But you start attacking our nuclear C2, you could trip a all-out attack. But the Chinese don't, and they relish this opportunity to not be standard and to put pressures on us. So I don't know where that's heading exactly, but I think Tom said on a really big point, which is there's an interesting world we're heading to. I'll just say that for that regional hypersonic, we better conventional most likely. We better get our act together on defending against it quickly.
Tommy, are you saying that there's 3 different systems we have to create, or we're allowed to just do one system?
No, it's not. This is not a system discussion. This is a policy discussion, right? So if there's a conventional hypersonic threat, Let's say there's a
But the
country.
system can defeat all three of them, correct? If you.
Well, it's the same weapon. That's the point. That's Mark's point. It's actually the same weapon. The one difference is one's nuclear warhead and the others have conventional, but you don't know when it's launched. So, however, there's you can say the likelihood is higher in a regional fight where the adversary is trying to stay under a nuclear threshold, that would be conventionally armed, and you need to be prepared to defend against a conventionally armed hypersonic threat, right?
Yeah.
The homeland is rife with danger, because here comes a hypersonic threat or a raid of them. Are they conventionally armed or are they nuclear? Well, if there's a dozen, and you look at the top dozen cities in the United States, that's pretty much that's our economy, that's our logistics system, that's our population centers, right?
What about Guam?
Versus a dozen conventionally armed. So that creates a major dilemma for a national decision maker, the national command authorities, on the response. So the assumption could very well be, listen, if anything comes, we're going to assume it's nuclear. So that gets us back to our strategic deterrent posture, right? And but that's where we launch. That's where we launch nuclear weapons, right? In response.
On Guam, that seems to be right there in that gray area. Is that a gray area or is that clearly U.S.?
Nothing is clear. So that's Mark,
It's a gray area.
I got to jump in on this. No. Hey, listen, for the purposes of this nuclear discussion, this is about the homeland of the continental United States plus Alaska and
yes, that's right.
Hawaii. Honestly, this regional issue. Look, you can have a nuclear tipped regional weapon. We've always felt that. Who's to say that a DF-21 flying at a aircraft carrier is conventional versus nuclear? If you want to make a close miss be a kill, and you want to take out the 4 destroyers with the carrier, why not put a nuclear tip in it? I don't think the Chinese are going to naturally do that. But what Tom's introducing is that there's a whole, if we think it's a cluster to talk about the technical problems of shooting it down, it's also a cluster to talk about the policy doctrine of thinking about it.
Yeah, and my point is that the people talking just agree to talk about, what are they talking about? Are we talking about this? Or are we talking about this? Or are we talking about this?
Well, I'll just add to that, right? So this whole conversation is about ambiguity, right? It's about ambiguity, and in defending nations in ambiguity, the most likely outcome is to assume the worst, right? And then back away from it, right? That's how you protect everything that Tom just talked about. It's creating multiple dilemmas, and our policies, what we do in that ambiguity defines what policy we apply for the response.
So typically this gets broken down, instead of 3, it gets broken down to 2. Regional conventional hypersonic threats, and homeland nuclear defense. So for the regional conventional hypersonic threat, we're relying on active defense, right? Deterrence and active defense. For the defense of the homeland versus a nuclear hypersonic threat, we're relying on strategic deterrence.
Which is no offense, no defense, all offense, basically, on that right now. Yeah. Okay, Mark, anything else? Any other questions? Anybody want to, before we close?
Believe it or not, we between Bob and I, we hit all the questions that came in during the discussion, including some complex ones about SM6s that Neil happened to hit. So good job by everybody. Ricky, I think we're at the position to close out.
All right, let's, as everybody, just do a short conclusion on the discussion today. Go ahead, Mark, you can start.
Okay, I'll start. Listen, great discussion. Good to hear 2 smart experts, and Neil and Tom. And then I'll just add that there's a lot to correct. There's a lot of great stuff being done, but we can't conflate getting some stuff done with getting all the stuff that we need. So there's a lot more that needs to be done. I hope the FY24 defense budget is a step off in the right direction on some of this, and they don't require Congress to fix it, because if Congress has to fix all of it, they'll probably only get to some of it. So let's hope look forward to the defense budget in February.
Thanks, Mark. Tom?
Hey, thrilled to be here. First time since I retired. Really happy for the invitation. Great to be with Neil and Mark. Really proud to be able to be here as a senior associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and then part of the Missile Defense Program there. These kinds of discussions and the ones that they host as well are really important to help policymakers as well as Congress decide on the trajectory for our nation. That's pretty important work.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, Neil.
Yeah, thanks, Ricky. Again, thanks for leading this and founding this and getting us in the conversation. To Tom and Mark, thanks for your insights and for your service to our nation. Both critical in my opinion. At the end of the day, we're talking about one piece of a huge defense infrastructure that has to get resolved, right? Between building ships and building tanks and building aircraft and building missiles, our leadership, our National Command Authority, our military leaders have some wicked hard decisions to get made. And I think the more we can inform that conversation with policy and the conversations with material conversations with tactics, techniques, procedure conversations, I think the better off our leaders have a chance of making great decisions. God bless them for what they're doing for our nation. It's wicked hard work. The last thing I'll say is, at the end of the day, whatever we do has to work together. We are beyond the parochials of the past. And if one thing that we learned working with Tom and Vice Admiral Wolf and Vice Admiral Hill now, the MDA director, and myself, is we can do it. We can behave differently. We can act like we're actually a nation fighting, not services fighting. And if we do that, then we have a better chance at both capacity and capability as we move forward. So again, Ricky, thanks for the time today. Great to be here.
Thank you, Neil. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Mark. We came up with some solutions that are real. You guys brought some good thought on allied participation, service participation, on the C2 all the way down to the firing, to the systems that we have today and the future systems. And we've got Congress behind us. I mean, what Mark said with the NDA, the money going into this is no longer an issue that nobody addresses, that has been practically the last 20 years. We are now looking, our Congress and our funding is looking at capacity build to take on the near peer, to take on the regional fight that we have to do. And it's awesome to see. It's awesome to see addressing the Army stuff. That I'm glad you addressed that clearly on how they can help and where they're going. And Tom, you got the best system. It was great to hear reinforce the Navy's greatness on this mission set. But to me, it's about team play. And I'm going to just go real quick to a football analogy. But if you look at the San Francisco 49ers, they've got the last pick in the draft being their quarterback. And they've been able to play at the top level of the game, beating everybody with this guy because the team is so good around him. And we're going to have weak spots. We got weak spots. But our team and the way to play together, and I think we've all mentioned that, jointly and allied way, is the way to beat these guys. And is a way to come up with a solution that works today while we can hold on to the future. So I thought this discussion was great. And being able to open this thing up right on the back of the congressional support for what we're doing. It's excellent to have you guys with us. It's excellent to go on beyond just North Korea and Iran and the old school ways. It's you guys are breaking new barriers, and you're leaders now. And your opinion and where you're going in your careers is huge to help this mission set expand and grow where it needs to go. So thank you very much. It was a great discussion. That was really, really fun to have you both here. And Mark, you're awesome as always. So thank you.
Thanks, guys.